our hearts to sing thy grace. Streams of mercy never ceasing, call for songs of loudest praise. While the hope of life's perfection fills our hearts with joy and love, teach us ever to be faithful. May we still thy goodness prove. Come, thou fount of every vision, lift our eyes to what may come. See the lion and the lambkin dwell together in thy home. Hear our cries of war fall silent, feel our love flow like the sun. When we all serve one another, then our heaven is begun. Come, thou fount of inspiration, turn our lives to higher ways. Lift our gloom and desperation, show the promise of this day. Help us find ourselves in union, help our hands tell of our love. With thy name, O fount of justice, earthly fair as heaven above. We are a gentle and green people, and we are singing, singing for our lives. We are a gentle and green people, and we are singing, singing for our lives. We are a
Good morning, everyone. Lovely to see you all this morning. We start our service each time with a bell to remind us to be in covenant with those people who are in our hearts and in our lives. The first bell is for those people who are in our hearts because we occupy their land. We are on the unceded land of the Muwekma tribe of the Ohlone people. So it behooves us to hold them, their customs, their traditions, their culture in our hearts to see that they survive as we do. We ring the second bell to be in covenant with ourselves and one another until we can look upon each other and the world outside without exceptions and consider one another beloved. And we ring the bell the third time for our children and our children's children out to the seventh generation, reminding us that what we do now or what we fail to do will be felt by those who come after us.
In my family, half of whom were English, there's a rumor that we had an ancestor who arrived on the Mayflower. I'm not sure it's true, but the idea has intrigued me more and more as I've learned about the Mayflower's actual arrival in North America. The arrival of these pilgrims and merchants was, of course, radically history-changing in so many ways. But the passengers on that ship came together at the last minute and realized they must develop some agreement about how they would treat each other in this new world. The group created a short pact among themselves that was a call for majority rule for the sake of the general good. Majority rule, not government-imposed rule that cared only for its own power, exemplified the way they hoped all people would be treated in their new colony. But its ramifications were felt by lawmakers far into the future. The Mayflower arrived at Cape Cod in 1620. After a long and perilous journey, one would imagine the pilgrims dashing off the ship and onto dry land as quickly as they could. But in fact, they waited on the ship as it sat in the harbor, the land tantalizingly close, until they wrote and signed a statement of self-government, the Mayflower Compact. The Mayflower Compact was a group agreement about how to provide rights to this group of citizens, to maintain order, and to establish a civil body politic in what was to become Plymouth Colony. It was necessary while the pilgrims awaited a patent approval from England to stay on the land where they had arrived. The compact established a majority rule for the sake of the general good. It called for, quote, just and equal laws for the good of the colony. These rules meant an equal vote for each person, well, each man. It called for the idea of law made by and for the people, for democratic rule rather than one set up by an autocrat or a self-serving privileged few. The compact was quite short, but it was one of the first examples of self-government in the New World, applying to the 102 pilgrims who arrived on the ship. It was signed by the 41 men on the ship who were physically able, as well as by a couple of indentured servants. They would need to start by abolishing that institution. The compact's group of creators set a precedent that has been interpreted by historians as a step in the evolution of democratic rule in America. Its influence was felt over a century later as the Founding Fathers developed the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. There have, of course, been numerous instances of profound social changes and developments in the United States history, and there are impassioned disagreements to this day over how much power and autonomy the citizenship has. Think battles over voting rights going on right now, for example. Still, it can be inspiring to see instances when some of our ancestors worked together for fairness, and democracy in this new world they were to call home. Please join with me in reciting these words, which call us together as a community and with Unitarian Universalists all across the globe. We light this chalice to remind ourselves to treat all people kindly because we are all one family, to take good care of the earth because it is our home, to live lives full of goodness and love because that is how we will become the best people we can be.
Good morning. Welcome to Mission Peak Unitarian Universalist Congregation. My name is Colleen Arnold. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm a member of the board. I'm going to start out by highlighting some current announcements. Please come join us for a Passover Seder potluck on Saturday, April 8th at 6 p.m. right here in Cole Hall. A Seder is a meal where the story is told of the liberation of Hebrew slaves from ancient Egypt. It's a fun Mission Peak UU tradition where we are reminded that religious freedom is as important today as it was thousands of years ago. See the week on the Peak or the order of service for details on how to sign up. Mission Peak UU's annual Easter egg hunt starts after the service on April 9th at 11:30 a.m. This afternoon, some folks are gathering to help Michelle and Kat pack some stuff and offer encouragement as they experience some of the challenges of their impending move. Who should people talk to if they are interested in joining that? Who should people talk to? Great, okay. We encourage attendees to be masked inside. We have masks available at the welcome table in the back. Please help yourself. The end of the mask requirement does not mean the end of COVID-19, which will remain present in our community. We are allowing attendees to decide which tools to use to keep themselves and others as healthy as possible. More information on the bulletin board to your left and in this week on the Peak. Please silence your electronic devices. If you're a guest for the first time, we welcome you. Here's a bit of information about how our hybrid services work. We use chat in Zoom or our book near the welcome table to share joys and concerns. These are personal milestones of importance which will be read aloud in the service. We also have social hour after the service where we get to visit with one another in breakout rooms or on the patio. The worship host will give you more information about this immediately after the service. Someone from our membership team will put a link to our weekly newsletter in the chat so you can see all the events coming up. We encourage you to join anything that speaks to you. We also put our welcome email, welcome@mpuuc.org, to request a newsletter or other information be sent to you. If you're here in person, our welcome table is right over there where you can sign up to receive a newsletter or ask any questions you may have. And now we end by asking everyone in Zoom land and everyone in Cole Hall to wave to one another and feel the joy of being one large beloved community. Welcome, and thank you to our members near and far.
We are building a new way. We are building a new way. We are building a new way, feeling stronger every day. We are building a new way. We can feed our every need. We every need. We can feed our every need. Start with love, that is the seed. We can feed our every need. Peace and freedom is our cry. Peace and freedom is our cry. Peace and freedom is our cry. Without these, our world will die. Peace and freedom is our cry. We are building a new way. We are building a new way. We are building a new way. Feeling stronger every day. We are building a new way. A new way, a new way, a new
Good morning. It's so wonderful to be here in person with all of you and all of you on Zoom. It's also a pleasure for me to be here with a member of my family. This is Naomi. Thank you for joining me.
You're welcome.
I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about a word and an idea that we talk about from time to time in our family. The word is persistence.
Yeah, you're pretty persistent about talking about persistence.
This is true. This is true. It's a word that teachers talk about a lot in school, and it's a word that our culture is exploring more and more. And I was wondering if you could share with us what it means to you, the word persistence.
It means to power through your struggles.
Would you say that one more time?
To power through your struggle.
Power through your struggles. That's beautiful. I was thinking you were going to say something like never give up, but you really surprised me with that answer. Can you think of a time when you persisted, when giving up just wasn't a choice that you were going to make?
Playing competitive softball.
Playing competitive softball. Yeah. Did you ever lose a game?
Yeah,
Yeah. Did you ever lose more than one game?
a whole season.
A whole season. Yeah. Whole summer season. Did you ever win a game?
Yeah, in the fall.
In the fall, turn for the fall season, you had some winning games. Are you glad you hadn't given up?
Yeah.
Did you ever had a time when you had to take one for the team?
Yeah, when my coach gave me the signal to not swing, and then another player stole home.
Do you remember what that signal looked like? In softball, like in baseball, the coaches give these signals and they mean things. Ah, okay. So you were at bat and you didn't swing, even though you could hit, so that somebody could steal home and score. Yeah, that's called team. I seem to be going in and out a little bit on the mic. But the definition of persistence includes the word continuously, as in existing for a long time or longer than usual or continuously. But I'd like to lift up the idea that sometimes we need breaks in the action. It's okay to step back now and again, to take a break and rejoin. I'm thinking of your brother and the trumpet. Have you noticed the courage it took him to step back into playing the trumpet after stepping away for nearly a year? He realized there was a joy and music together, and he was missing out. So he mustered the courage and stepped back into his middle school band. He'll be performing at Open House this Thursday. He took a break. He got some downtime, then stepped back in, and this week he gets to reap the rewards of that courageous act to rejoin. Breaks in our persistence don't mean we've given up. There's always the option to return. So I'd like to thank you for waking up early to be part of this. You took one for the team today. Thanks, Sam.
Dear Shauna, when things looked bleak for the choir in 2014, you stepped in temporarily while we tried to raise money, and you stayed again and continued to stay. And when finally we are in a position to hire a new choir director, and you even helped us a bit with finding Vaughn, who will lead us into the future. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You've done a fantastic job, and I really appreciate it.
Thanks isn't enough to express my heartfelt gratitude to Shauna for sharing her amazing talents and stories with us and creating a safe place to express ourselves musically. So happy the 3 months turned into more than 7 years. We love you.
I'd like to thank Shauna for inviting me to sing and record with the Peak performers during COVID. I find Shauna is such a supportive person, really nice, and a true mensch.
Hi, Shauna. Even though our time together in Peak Performers was short, it was invaluable. I learned a lot about choral music, including using my headtones. Thank you so much, Shauna, for all your help. I wish you well and hope to stay in touch.
Thank you, Shauna, for making me feel so welcome in your rehearsals. You even gave me Zoom classes where I learned how to bring out my best voice. Favorite part? Warming up our voices and singing our way home at the end. I know I'm not alone in missing you already.
Shauna, thank you for your immense patience with us. We could never read music, but you always provided us with what we needed, the piano guide files. Thank you for everything, and we wish you well.
Dearest Shauna, you have taught me so much about how to run a rehearsal, about how to bring out creativity. You've taught me vocal techniques, and you've given me my voice back. Thank you so much.
Shauna, we are so indebted to you for donating your incredible talents as a director and a singer and a vocal coach and a cheerleader and concert pianist. Thanks to you and Drew, Peak Performers didn't just survive the worst of the pandemic, we actually improved. You are amazing. God go with you.
Thank you, Shauna. You helped me sing better. You let us expand the choir. You led us into virtual production during the pandemic. Hooray for Shauna. Yes, Shauna. Shauna Pickett Gordon. Thank you.
When a choir director was sought, we found one who just couldn't be bought. So once every week, Shauna worked with the Peak, and great singing techniques they were taught. Thank you so much for a great 7 years, Shauna.
There once was a wonder named Sean, a miracle worker in song. When we sang off key and she pointed to me, she then showed me how to move on. With kindness, encouragement, skills, she fashioned our lovely trills. Thanks for your love and your gentlest of shoves. My heart with love for you fills.
Shauna, it's not just your amazing skill and incredible experience that prompted our choir to excellence. It's that the people you've worked with have come to trust you. They trust you to help get the music into their heart, and then they trust you to help share their heart with one another. You have brought so much life and love here. We are so grateful. We love you. I love you. Thank you. I think we're all feeling a little bit, or a lot of bit, of gratitude for Shauna Pickett-Gordon for leading us musically for 7 years. Thank you, Shauna. One of the things that happens when we come together and all sing as one body, it fills our hearts with love and with gratitude. And when we have that kind of gratitude, we want to give back. We take a collection every Sunday because we realize that we live for more than ourselves. We live for one another and for the values that we bring into the world. We hope that you will choose to be thankful with us and enable and enlarge our ministries in the world. Please, if you can, make a contribution to these worthy causes by mailing your check to Mission Peak UU Congregation at the address on the screen. You can also use bill pay in your online banking, or drop your check in the Mission Peak mail slot, or pay online with a credit or debit card, or just give us bundles of cash. Thank you for supporting and sustaining these efforts that make us each and all better for being together. Your contributions make loving, learning, and leadership more possible.
One of the things that allows us to find hope and meaning, especially in the hard times, is the love and support we show one another. If you have a joy or concern that by sharing with this caring community might bring the encouragement or resilience you're needing, please write it briefly now in the chat. If you're here in person and would like to place a stone for a joy or concern, you may do so while the music plays. If your need is personal, you can also send an email to our ministers, Reverend Greg or Reverend Barbara, or anyone on our encouragement team for a follow-up conversation. For the people of Mississippi and Ukraine and everywhere lives are lost and need reminders that they are not alone in this tragic moment and in their grief. John Porter writes, "The Poems 2 group surprised me last Monday evening by each reading a poem from my recent book, Reflections at 92 Poems. I was so touched and happy. What a wonderful group of friends." Shauna Pickett Gordon writes, "I may not have enough tissues in this house for this service. My heart is so full." James Inkeep and Ingrid, "Shauna, I had a great time in the choir practice with you and learned so much." Lucienne Bouvier writes, "I'm so grateful to the wonderful people in our community who've given so much help to keep me and my home safe during this extraordinarily stressful and challenging weather." Shauna writes, "Special thanks to my darling partner, Drew Wilson, whose constant support, both administratively and technically, have enabled me to do my thing with the choir." Yvonne Hughes writes, "I've been enjoying the sun and my grandkids visiting from Illinois and LA this past 2 weeks." Drew Wilson writes, "A joy. Speaking of choirs, Shauna and I attended a Peninsula Cantare concert last night in Palo Alto. We used to sing with them before COVID. They are now 70 members strong and sound fantastic. I guess they've managed without us." And Ingrid thanks the choir for your loving outreach. Lisa Lefcourt, "Joy. Yesterday was my dear brother David's birthday. I celebrate the wonderful brother he is every day, but especially on his day. Thank you all for sharing my joy. Happy birthday to David." David has a joy, "Glad to have the privilege and health to have walked this earth for 66 years plus 1 day." And from our Book of Joys and Concerns here in the sanctuary, "A joy. Colleen and Greg's son Benjamin not only turned 18, but also successfully got his driver's license. Hooray!" Ramadan Mubarak from Allison and Graham. "Muslims all over the world began fasting last week." It isn't just the choir who appreciates Shauna's choir leadership. Those of us on the receiving end are indebted to her for freely sharing her skills, as we were the beneficiaries of the wonderful and often fun musical results, especially dear during COVID. And finally, from Don Ramey, "Thanks for everyone who joined me for an afternoon with the artist." Let us drop one last stone, including all the hopes and hurts spoken and silent in our heart. May, for the sake of love, we always keep our doors, our hearts, our minds, and our arms open.
Let us join together in the spirit of this reflection. This morning, I want to talk about a particular oft-quoted phrase. You may have heard it. All for one and one for all. Ever heard it? Okay, here's a quiz. Which famous writer said it? I'll make it easier, multiple choice. Was it Shakespeare, Alexander Dumas, or Aesop? No. Of course, anyone who has read Dumas' swashbuckling French historical novel, The Three Musketeers, knows that it was the oft-repeated central phrase that the Musketeers rallied around. Their loyalty united them over tyranny and corruption and even their own petty egos and machismo. Curiously, however, their loyalty to that phrase was short-lived. At the end of the book, all of Dumas's characters, Athos, Porthos, Aramis, and D'Artagnan, all go their separate ways to pursue their own private ambitions. All for one and one for all. It's a chiasmus, a curious literary device in which two clauses are balanced by reversing their structures. So one for all becomes all for one. In French, un tout pour un. But it has been translated into countless languages over the globe. It is even the unofficial motto of Switzerland. But interestingly, this phrase was old when Dumas got it. So the answer to the quiz was actually A, William Shakespeare. I mean, didn't he really say everything? But it did not appear in any of his plays or his sonnets. It comes from 1593, a time when the bubonic plague was ravaging London and suspicion and distrust abounded. Shakespeare was not writing to support his troupe or the Globe Theatre, which had closed to curb the spread of the disease. Shakespeare instead turned to narrative poetry. And he wrote a piece about two soldiers bound in a code of honor by military service. And yet one soldier nevertheless betrayed the other, choosing pleasure and greed over loyalty. He dishonored the other's wife, leading to her death. Like Dumas, 200 years later, Shakespeare wrote these words, knowing their power, but questioning our will to carry them out. He wrote, "The aim of all is but to nurse a life, with honor, wealth, and ease in waning age. And in this aim we encounter strife, to ask one for all, or all for one we gauge. When honor for wealth and all that wealth doth cost, bring death of all, and all together are lost." All for one and one for all. What can we make of this curious phrase, especially as its two examples lift up such a dubious case for our ability to carry out this aspiration? Our hearts yearn for it, and it makes us want to raise our glasses, but those heroes who manage to live up to it and encourage others to join in it seem rare. Or maybe they are not so rare. Maybe they are just hiding everywhere in plain sight.
There's a hero. If you look inside your heart, you don't have to be afraid of what you are. There's an answer if you reach into your soul, and the sorrow that you know will melt away. And then a hero comes along with the strength to carry on, and you cast your fears aside, and you know you can survive. So when you feel like hope is gone, look inside you and be strong, and you'll finally see the truth that a hero lies in you. Oh, it's a long road when you face the world alone, and no one reaches out a hand for you to hold. You can find love if you search within yourself, and that emptiness you felt will disappear. And then a hero comes along with the strength to carry on, and you cast your fears aside, and you know you can survive. So when you feel like hope is gone, look inside you and be strong, and you'll finally see the truth that your hero lies in you. Lord knows, dreams are hard to follow. Yes, they are. But don't let anyone tear them away. Yeah. Hold on, there will be tomorrow, and in time you will find the way. And then a hero comes along with the strength to carry on, and you cast your fears aside, and you know you can survive. So when you feel like hope is gone, look inside you and be strong, and you'll finally see the truth that a hero lies in you. Yes, a hero lies in you. Oh, a hero lies in you.
Thank you to Nudie Van Hoven and Joanne Schreiner for that anthem. Been reading the news lately, and it feels a little bit like we've been duped. Whatever agreement that we reached, whatever compact we made, it seems, again, like the greater good got sold out for the interests of a few. When Silicon Valley and Signature Banks failed last week, there was a familiar look of contrition of bank leaders, maybe a reluctant acknowledgement that maybe better oversight or smarter regulation could have helped. Of course, bigger banks scurried to separate themselves. They assured everyone that all was fine, no more regulation was needed. Such banks said that they are perfectly capable of performing their own stress tests to ensure proper fiscal management under difficult conditions. The best response that I heard to that was from Senator Elizabeth Warren, who said, "I taught school for years, and I never let my students do their own testing." One of the reasons for this is obvious from the last lines of Shakespeare's poem. When we honor wealth and all that wealth doth cost, it bringeth death of all, and all together are lost. In the 2008 financial crisis, the checks written to bail out banks and the auto industry totaled more than $1.6 trillion. The dot-com crash led to 80% of stock values disappearing when the bubble burst. And in the savings and loan crash of the 1970s, a third of all S&Ls failed, requiring $132 billion of taxpayer money. Deregulation, speculative trading, greed, corruption, these are largely to blame for sure, but there's a bigger reason. There's a certain finagling that sometimes happens where we make of ourselves some exemption. We make ourselves an exception. When banks and industry are in trouble, we hear a lot about how we're all in this together. The people then pay up, but after a while, when business returns to normal, that exceptionalism returns, and there is no commensurate kumbaya moment when the people are in trouble. People who exempt themselves are often the ones who point out the ways that others don't belong in the pact, calling pregnant mothers welfare queens and giving them empty promises of trickle-down prosperity. For the record, I am a big fan of what Naomi talked about this morning, persistence. But it works better when we all have it and we all practice it for one another. But for the number of times exemptions are claimed and exceptionalism becomes the rule, means that the promise that we made long ago together begins to feel old and that we're ready for a new deal. So this morning, I want to talk about a time in our nation's history that has always inspired me, a time much like today where exceptionalism and polarizing rhetoric abounded and created a chasm between those who had and those who had not, or those who hung out in the center of privilege and those who lived in the margins. And yet, where we came together in that moment to forge a new promise, a new deal. The Great Depression, when speculation and greed and corruption broke the financial compact that we had made with others, served as a great equalizer. Many who had lots lost it all and found themselves side by side with those who never had anything. And it was a time that brought people and institutions together who had long acted in exclusive self-interest. Today, when you hear that slogan, "Make America Great Again," it's often a wish to return to times where a more self-interest is allowed to prevail. Today, I want us to consider a few remarkable things that happened when people in that moment suddenly found themselves living side by side. And let's think about what it took to build a promise like the New Deal, and to think about the kind of people it took to make it happen. And I want to present all of this from the vantage point of someone's life whose name you may not recognize much. It all begins actually a little bit before the New Deal. 112 years ago yesterday, March 24th, 1911, is the anniversary of a great tragedy. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire killed 147 people in New York City, mostly immigrant women and girls. It was the biggest workplace tragedy until the Twin Towers fell on 9/11. The owners of the factory were named Max Planck and Isaac Harris, and they were known as New York's Shirtwaist Kings. They employed seamstresses to work 13 hours a day, 7 days a week, at a rate of 13 cents an hour. Blank and Harris were no strangers to factory fires. They actually had a habit of torching their buildings in the middle of the night to collect the insurance money, which isn't what actually happened in the Triangle fire, but it is the reason why they never installed sprinklers. The building was horribly unsafe. The factory floors were cramped and overcrowded. The hallways and fire escapes were extremely narrow, and only one of the 4 elevators worked. Of the 2 stairways that led down to the street, one was locked to prevent workers from stealing the blouses that they were sewing. The other opened inward, making it almost impossible to open when a panicked mob tried to escape. The fire hose was rotted, and the valve was rusted so badly it could not be opened. 600 workers were in the shop when the fire broke out in a rag bin on the 8th floor. Workers rushed to the elevator, but it held only 12 people at a time, and it broke after only a few trips. The lone fire escape collapsed, and some of the girls, desperate to escape the blaze, jumped down the elevator shaft. Firemen gathered at the bottom holding a net, but the weight and the speed of the falling bodies ripped right through, and everyone who jumped died. Blanc and Harris happened to be on the floor above the fire, and they were able to make it to the roof, where they escaped to the building next door. They were later brought before a grand jury on manslaughter charges, but not indicted. On the day of the fire, Frances Perkins was 2 blocks away, having tea with a wealthy friend. Frances Perkins herself was not wealthy, but she had trained with Jane Addams at Hull House in Chicago, an agency that existed to curb the exploitation of immigrant women and girls. And Perkins learned how to network in order to build cooperation. Prior to moving to Greenwich Village in New York to attend Columbia, Perkins worked in Philadelphia, helping immigrant women escape the sex trafficking trade. When the 2 women having tea heard the screams, both ran to the building and found it ablaze, smoke pouring forth and women jumping. That image etched itself into Perkins' heart. The next day, Perkins recalled that New Yorkers everywhere gathered to talk about what had happened. She says, quote, "I can't begin to tell you how disturbed the people were everywhere," she said. "It was as though we had all done something wrong. We were terribly sorry. It was an awful thing for the people of New York to face," end quote. She met Al Smith, the Democratic majority leader of the New York State Legislature, because he actually in person accompanied families of the dead to the morgue to express his sympathy and grief. "It was an incredibly human and decent thing to do," Perkins said, "not the kind of exempt exceptionalism that we tend to see from politicians." The next Sunday after the tragedy, concerned New Yorkers gathered at the Metropolitan Opera House with the conviction to actually do something, to turn this into some sort of constructive action. One man contributed $25,000 to fund a citizen's action to, quote, "make sure that this kind of thing never happened again." From that gathering, a committee was created which asked the legislator to create a bipartisan commission to figure out how to improve fire safety in factories. For 4 years, Frances Perkins was the chief investigator of that commission. She worked with Al Smith in the legislature to come up with ideas about how to prevent fires and improve factory conditions. A few years later, when Smith became governor of New York, many of their ideas became law, including setting a maximum of 54-hour work week and the Sullivan-Hoey fire prevention law. For 2 decades, Perkins lobbied tirelessly in New York politics to weed out corruption and pass meaningful legislation like child labor laws, factory inspections, 8-hour workdays. But time and time again, power-wielding politicians of both parties blocked labor legislation. And whenever a law happened to slip through Congress, it was struck down by the Supreme Court. By 1930, Perkins noted in dismay how European labor had managed to create a social solid safety net for their workers, but for America's workforce, especially those in the margins, they remained unprotected divided, oppressed, and exploited. When Perkins married a handsome, rich progressive, Paul Wilson, she defied convention and kept her maiden name. But it turned out getting married only meant that she ended up lobbying for fairer standards in both her personal and professional life. In a short time, she discovered that both her husband and her daughter would be diagnosed with signs of severe depression. They were institutionalized for long periods of their life. And Perkins got an up-close glimpse at the ways that government services operated without regulated health or safety standards. Throughout her career, she protected her husband and daughter fiercely with anonymity and fought behind the scenes to change the systems that provided them care. Her entire life became about how to have influence and bring people together for the common good. She discovered that men trusted women who were motherly and not seductive. And so she changed the way she thought about her gender, which was, up until that point, mostly considered a marginalizing factor. But she recognized that it could actually be an asset. And shortly after she got married, she began to dress and comport herself in a way that reminded men of their mothers. Now, at the time that she made this change, she had become the head of the Industrial Commission, and she was only 33 years old. Up until then, papers characterized her as perky, pretty, or dimpled. But they immediately, after that, shifted to calling her Mother Perkins, a reference she disliked only slightly less than Ma Perkins. In 1921, I think that's probably an example of taking one for the team. In 1929, when the Depression struck, millions lost their savings and lost their job, but Perkins stepped out front and felt the dire circumstance that people were living under. So when President Herbert Hoover claimed that unemployment was ending, Perkins made national news by summoning that maternal presentation and admonishing Hoover, repeatedly pointing to figures proving just the opposite of what he was saying and calling his misleading statements cruel and irresponsible. This led to leaders from other states of both sides of the aisle to join her in protecting workers and promoting employment. In 1933, she found herself working for New York Governor Franklin Roosevelt when he was elected president. A few weeks before his inauguration, FDR called Perkins into his office, asking her to accept a new job, Secretary of Labor. No woman had ever held a cabinet post before. Holding a cabinet post meant that Frances Perkins was put in line to ascend to the presidency. She thought about the offer, and then she reached into her purse and she pulled out a piece of paper that she had had in there for a long time. On it were written her professional goals and ideals. She handed them to Roosevelt. That paper read, 40-hour work week, minimum wage, workers' compensation, unemployment insurance, federal ban on child labor, Social Security, universal health care. She said, Roosevelt looked a little flustered when he read this list. And so she reminded him, nothing like this has ever been done in the United States. You know that, don't you? The congenial Roosevelt paused, reviewed the list, and knowing that her acceptance was conditional on allowing her to do that, he finally agreed to endorse everything. She went home and thought it over. She wept at the strain that she knew it would bring to her husband and her daughter. And then she took the job. I came to Washington, she said, to work for God, for FDR, and the millions of forgotten, plain, common working men and women. The press mocked Ma Perkins, or Frances the Perk, as they called her, but she paid them little mind and made them call her Madame Secretary. Over the course of the next 6 years, she passed every single piece of legislation on that list, save one, universal health care, which the AMA tenaciously resisted. They resisted so forcefully, they threatened to dismantle the Social Security Act. So she reluctantly surrendered, hoping that a new administration in the future might be able to push it through. She never forgot healthcare and advocated for the next 8 years for its passage. And when Lyndon Johnson made it part of his War on Poverty campaign, he managed to pass Medicare amendments, providing health care for the elderly, and Medicaid, providing health care for those with limited income. But Frances Perkins had died 2 months before that amendment was signed. So what can we make of all of this? For me, two things stand out. First, none of this happens without a lot more people of the promise learning to live and work alongside their fellow citizens. No more exceptionalism based on class or race or religion or language. For people remain true to all, they have to be proximate with those who they are fighting for, those with whom they share this promise. And then there is one division in particular, and that is gender. As I was doing this research on this sermon, one of the things I discovered was that as all this social legislation was being written and presented and defended and passed, reporters began referring to those pushing this through the system as, quote, the ladies' brain trust. And that was because it was women, not just Frances Perkins, who made this happen. There were women that Frances Perkins made sure were in the administration, like Claire Baer, who researched, authored, and shepherded much of the legislation that has to do with worker safety, maximum hours, minimum wage, and unemployment insurance. And Mary Ledame, who worked with the U.S. Employment Service to create and distribute jobs through the WPA and reduce the humiliation and suffering of unemployment. And Mary T. Norton, who was one of the first women elected to serve as a U.S. representative in 1925, her staunch support on the House floor of wage and hour legislation championed the Fair Employment Practices Act and raised the minimum wage from, at that time, 40 cents to 75 cents an hour. And then there was Molly Dewson, who rose from the finally successful women's suffrage campaign to research and write the Social Security Act and serve on its legislative board. These women all understood the phrase, all for one and one for all, because they understood from suffragism how to organize, how to be a team, how to create a coalition, how to work together. They understood the heart and the mind of oppressed people because as women, they were oppressed people. And oppressed people understand that their strength is in numbers, not in making themselves exceptions or exemptive. Exceptions among the oppressed mean that you are vulnerable and often killed. The inspiring part to me is that these women's commitment to working together made them the exception to politics as usual, where bureaucrats usually fight amongst themselves to see who could get the most for their private constituencies. These women actually understood all for one and one for all. And they understood that all really did mean everyone. For almost 250 years in this country, there's been a privileged faction which has repeatedly and systematically tried to separate and distance itself from everyone else. These exceptional people have never stopped saying all for one and one for all. They just have a much more narrow definition when they say all. I hope from this we can take the call to be people of the promise, which is to say, people of the coalition who hold a vision and work to make it come true for all people, for all time, in all places. Amen.
land where we bind up the broken. We'll build a land where the captives go free, where the oil of gladness dissolves all mourning. Oh, we'll build a promised land that can be. Come, build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by God, made and create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream. We'll build a land where we bring the good tidings to all the afflicted and all those who born. Come build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by God, may then create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream. Come build a land where the mantles of praises resound from spirits once faint and once weak, where like oaks of righteousness stand her people. Oh, come build the land that we seek. Come build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by God, may then create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream.
Please join with me in reciting these words to extinguish our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Friends, one hand on your heart. You can put another hand on somebody else's shoulder or just the shoulder of the world around you. Let us be people of the promise, that larger promise, that compact that makes the world a better place, which is to say, people of a greater coalition. We want to be people who hold a vision and work to make it come true, because truth is, we know we are better together. That means all of us, everywhere, always. Amen.